Hi guys, my name is Emily. Welcome to my discussion of Wolves of Calla by Stephen King. This will be a video that contains spoilers for Wolves of Calla. I don't really have that much to say for a review other than I liked it. So, if you haven't read the book yet, come back once you've read it and discuss with me. Like with any video that's been part of the DT Project 17, two disclaimers. One, this is my first time reading the Dark Tower series, so if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense because you've read the whole series, that's why I haven't read the whole series yet. And number two, I do not care about authorial intentions for various reasons I've explained numerous times, both in the comments and in a completely separate video. So I will leave these places. This is the approach that I was taught in university. It's part of my educational background and it's how I approach most texts. While you may disagree about authorial intentions, and that is your prerogative, this is the approach that I have chosen to use while applying literary analysis, literary criticism to the Dark Tower series, and it will remain constant throughout the rest of this reading project. So at various points during this video, you will encounter past Emily, who filmed the original round of this video. Editing Emily realized that she failed to make some connections, that I assumed some things, and then watching it back, I think I need to add a little bit. One of those things is that I am going to be using a lot of literary criticism of W.B. Yeats, his text, A Vision, and his poetry in general to sort of frame my understanding of the series. Because when I read the quote that you will hear in a few moments, I was immediately pulled into all of Yeats and his sort of wacky ideas and how well these ideas actually work to frame my understanding of the series. So we're going to cut to past Emily and she will share that quote and why it is relevant, and then we will cut back to present Emily whenever there needs to be some sort of explanation that past Emily missed. I'm going to start this discussion first by looking at W.B. Yeats. So on page 738 in my edition of the book, Jake Chambers is thinking about how, quote, in school Miss Avery had read them a poem called The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats. There had been something in it about a hawk turning and turning in a widening gyre, which was, according to Miss Avery, a kind of circle. But here things were in a spiral, not a circle. For the Catet of 19, or the 90 and 9, Jake had an idea they were really the same, things were tightening up even as the world around them grew old, grew loose, shut down, shed pieces of itself. It was like being in the cyclone which carried Dorothy off to the land of Oz, where witches were real and bum hugs ruled. To Jake's heart, it made perfect sense that they should be seeing the same things over and over and more often. So let's talk about W.B. Yeats and his somewhat interesting theories on how the world works. It's interesting to me to note that Yeats is another 20th century poet. Once again, we see the series sort of being built on the foundations of 20th century art. We have Robert Browning's poem Child Roll Into the Dark Tower Came, which the series draws its name from, and of course we have T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, another 20th century poem that one of the books in the series gets its name from. So we can see the 20th century works, those 20th century poets struggling to make art and struggling to deal with reality post World War I. People were trying to deal with the reality that humanity was not profoundly good. It seemed like before that we had this romantic notion in which humanity had hit this golden age, everything was awesome. And then World War I happened and they were like, no, we really haven't changed all that much. Dr. Jonathan Boulter at the University of Western Ontario argued that Yeats's body of works is in response to the cultural loss of the sacred. And he read Yeats's text, A Vision, as semi-religious, as something attempting to reassert the sacred. And I've read this book a couple of times as well for Dr. Boulter's class, and it's a book that ultimately tries to codify human experience. Basically, he invents a religion to bring order to the chaos of the world he's living in. So what we see happening in A Vision is an organization of history and a belief in a history that repeats itself, a constant cycle of people and events and order and chaos. On top of this sort of semi-religious reincarnation stuff that Yeats is talking about in A Vision, we also have to remember that Yeats is considered a modernist, and modernists are always playful. At one point, Yeats said that he believes that he was Giraldus reincarnated because he sort of looks like a wood carving of Giraldus. And the sort of absurdity of that, I think, indicates a playfulness. And I think that playfulness is an indication of the fictiveness and an awareness of the fictiveness within A Vision. So when I say fictive, I mean fiction making. So in A Vision's attempt to sort of understand history and create a new order, there is something inherently fictive about it. All histories are inherently fictive because history, like events, don't exist within narratives and plot structures. It's only when an historian takes these events and puts them into a narrative arc that they become a history that we can consume in sort of a manageable way. And in that way, history is always sort of fictive in nature. I think the idea of history making is interesting, especially when we're thinking about this book as a work of fiction. I'm not quite sure what I want to do with that idea, but I think drawing attention to the fictionality of Roland's narrative is something that is happening throughout the text. And I just want to pull aside a quote that I think indicate that these characters are fictional within their own setting. Like, yes, they are fictional for me as a human, but I think they are fictional within the fiction. And I think Roland is sort of aware of that. Quote, "A novel is a story, isn't it? A made-up story? Yes, that's what fiction means. Make-believe," Roland pondered this. Charlie the Choo-Choo had also been make-believe, only in many ways it hadn't been. And the author's name had changed. There were many different worlds, all held together by the tower. Maybe, no, not now. He mustn't think about these things now. And that's from page 781 and 82 in my version of the text. So it seems like Roland is starting to think through the ideas of what is history, what is fiction, what is real, what is not, within the fiction that I'm reading. And I think these characters wrestling with their own fictionality, their own part of a fictive history, sort of comes to light at the end of the book when Callahan realizes that he is a character in a book called Salem's Lot by Stephen King. So Callahan is fictional in another Where and When. So it's interesting that these two characters have come together in Roland's narrative and that Callahan seems to be a part of Roland's quartet. I also think it's interesting that Callahan came through the doorway cave and that we see Roland and Callahan move through this doorway cave. It is a doorway in the side of a hill, and I think that brings us back to the fairy tale Child Roland, where they travel around the hill 3 times, open door, and let me come in, and then they move from their one where into another where, so to speak. Roland's narrative is pulling together other fictional narratives, and Roland's history is being sort of mapped onto other narratives, other fictional narratives. There is a lot going on in terms of fiction and narrative making and history and the blurriness between all of these things and other sort of fantasy texts. So the second thing that's important about Yeats is that he's considered a part of the symbolism movement. So a symbol is always attempting to bridge the gap between the eternal and the temporal. Quote, "100 generations might write out what seemed to be the meaning, and they would write out different meanings. For no symbol tells all its meaning to any generation." And that is a quote from Yeats. So a symbol that occurs throughout Yeats' body of works is the rose. When we see that symbol operating in Yeats' poetry, we are taking this very temporal thing, like a real life flower, and tapping into the eternal in all of the embedded meaning in that object. The rose is all at once a Platonic symbol. It is a symbol of beauty, it's a symbol of love, it's a symbol of pain because it has thorns. So there are many meanings, and in evoking a symbol that has so much meaning throughout time, throughout literature. Yeats's poetry goes beyond the now and it links itself to other literatures and in that way becomes immortal. And that is one of the things that I've been doing throughout my reading of the Dark Tower series, is constantly linking the series back to older texts where it is rooted. Older fantasy texts, older fantastic texts. I think that the symbol of the rose that appears throughout Yeats' work, and the symbol and literal rose in the Dark Tower, is also interesting. That the rose is sort of this opposite to the tower, or an equivalent to the tower, the twin of the tower. I'm not quite sure what to do with it yet, but I think that's something to keep in mind as we approach the end of this quest with the end of the series. The third thing that I think is important to take from Yeats is the idea of the gyre. Yeats sort of envisions history spiraling. So if we take this spiral and we turn it sideways and we envision it as conical in shape, always spiraling out from a point of order to a point of chaos. And within that point of complete chaos, there is always a new point of order that begins spiraling ever outward. In the moment of absolute chaos, there is a point of order. I think that, again, when it comes to thinking through the Dark Tower and what is happening and how we're sort of, time is speeding up, things are falling apart, things are spiraling out towards that topmost point of chaos as we reach the conclusion of this series. I think thinking of gyres and thinking about how Yeats envisions history in this way will be important for thinking through what is happening in the series and what might happen in the series. I just think it's a very useful visual for making sense of the narrative. And I know I really haven't touched on a lot of the other things going on with the wolves and the battle and the twinning. Like, here is a place where twinning and doubles is a thing. And I think all of that twinning and doubling is important, but like, it's not as interesting to me as this idea of gyres and chaos and narrative making, and how no matter what we're doing, whether we consider it real or not real, when we tell a history, when we tell a story, there is always something fictional and constructed about it. As we move forward into Song of Susanna, I can only imagine that things are going to get more meta. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on fiction, fictionality. Remember that I haven't read the rest of the series yet, so no spoilers. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with my thoughts on Song of Susanna. Bye.